heaven after presenting themselves before the Lord of all the earth. The chariot with the black horses goes towards the north, the white goes to the west, the dappled goes towards the south. When the steeds came out, they were impatient to get off and patrol the earth. And he said, go patrol the earth. So they patrolled the earth. And he said to me, behold, those who go towards the north have set my spirit at rest in the north country. These go throughout the whole earth. And here's something else that wasn't necessarily brought up last week. 4 is another number that is used a lot. What does 4 represent? Does anyone know?
Universality.
Universality. Why would you say that?
Because that's why I have written here.
Okay. Tell me more about that.
But the 4 Gospels, that was one of the parameters for choosing which Gospels went into the Bible.
Oh, that's a good point.
4 shows up a lot, and it's 4 directions.
Mm-hmm. The 4 living creatures before the throne, yes.
Corners of the earth.
The 4 corners of the earth, yes. All right, so all of that. The compass, north, south, east, west, there's 4. It represents all. So the number 4 represents a totality or universality. Okay, so these horsemen affect everything or everybody, if you will. And that's what you see here in Revelation 6, and it's also what you see in Zechariah 6. That whatever effect that these horsemen go in patrolling the earth, it patrols the whole earth, north, south, east, and west. Okay, yes?
My sister here, I was like, how many elements are there? The 4 elements, water.
Oh, earth, air, fire, and water. Oh, that's a good point. Yes, the ancients talked about that. Everything sublunar was composed of 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water. Why do I say sublunar? Because everything above the moon was considered of a 5th element, a quintessence. Quintessence, yes, is where it comes from. It means 5th element or 5th essence. It's beyond the 4 elements. And it was considered to be indestructible and everlasting. Everything sublunar was considered to be susceptible to change, corruptible, right? But everything supralunar in the Ptolemaic system was considered to be indestructible and everlasting. It was made of a 5th element that we didn't know about. But everything below that was made of 4 elements. So yes, that was a reasoning through analogy by the ancients. They wanted to know what is the prime element. And some said it was water, some said it was air, some said it was earth, some said it was fire. Aristotle said, you know what, they're all kind of right. It's a combination of them all. It was only Democritus, the philosopher, who proposed that it wasn't an element, but an unelement, something that couldn't be cut. He called, and that word in Greek that for uncut is atom. Atom. Tom means to cut or divide, and is a negating principle. It means it's undivided, uncut. Because you can take something and cut it, 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 and you still get pieces of it. But he theorized that there comes a point where it comes to a point where it can't be uncut further. And so he posited something that was uncut. Atoms, yes. We call them atoms. All an atom means it's uncut. It's the very basic element of everything. Okay? He was the only Greek philosopher that said everyone else believed in earth, air, fire, and water was the basic substance of the universe. At least sublunar. But now we're getting into ancient science. We don't want to go too far off that. But that's the number 4. So that's part of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. They're universal and they cover everything. Okay? Another reference for these in the Old Testament would be Ezekiel 14. Ezekiel 14 verses 12 and following. That will give you some idea of where these horsemen come from. All right? So, what do the 4 horses represent? Right here, Monica? Which one is war? The red horse. What does the white horse represent?
Conquest.
Conquest. What's the black horse?
Famine.
Famine. What's the pale horse?
Death.
Death. So they are given names in the book of Revelation. Or at least their presence is more further expanded. Now, what is so not unusual about this? What do you mean? Well, let's put it this way. When you have a king who's bent on expanding the empire, what normally happens? Conquest, which means you go to war. And when you go to war, what happens? Famine. And what happens as a result? Death. Lots of death. So these are just the natural, if you will, progressions that have occurred since the dawn of time. Okay? They are considered a blight onto humanity. Uncontrolled power by individuals that leads to war, and peace is removed from the earth. That causes famine, and naturally between the war and famine comes death. Okay? Now, here's a 4-ticket question. I went and I paralleled Revelation 6 with something in the Gospels. What was it?
Olivet Discourse.
The Olivet Discourse, found where?
Matthew 24.
24, yes, Matthew 24. The progression that you see in Revelation 6 can be broken apart like this. I'm going to give you this so that you have it. Okay? Let me see if I can put it here. So, you have Jesus' Olivet Discourse, which is Matthew 24. So I'm going to put Jesus here and Revelation 6 here. So Jesus in Matthew 24, verse 5, parallels what happens in Revelation. And I didn't put that here. Which one is which? It's the white horse. Okay? Matthew 24 verses 6 through 7a parallels the red horse. Matthew 24 7b talks about famine, which is the black horse. Okay? Matthew 24 verses 9 through 14 parallels Revelation 6 verses 9 through 11, the martyrs of the church. Okay, that are underneath the altar in heaven. And then Matthew 24 verses 12 through 17 is the 6th seal, which is the judgment on the earth. Okay? So this is the first seal, the second seal, third seal, the fourth seal is death. The martyrs are the 5th seal. And the 6th seal judgment is the wrath of the Lamb that comes upon the earth. So that basically breaks down or parallels what our Lord was talking about in the Olivet Discourse. Now, what is interesting about this is what causes many preterists to believe that the book of Revelation is predicting the fall of Jerusalem in the same way that Jesus predicted it in the Olivet Discourse. I believe that that's a possibility. I think that if the book of Revelation was written when I believe it was, this is an after the fact kind of connection. Okay? I don't think it's wrong. I just think it's an after the fact connection rather than a predictive prophecy in that respect. Okay? But in any case, the four horsemen of the apocalypse follow what has transpired. A king has come, Titus. He's come to Jerusalem to conquer. What happens? There's war, there's famine, there's death, and there are martyrs. And this is a judgment upon the earth. And who did it affect directly if we connect it with the Olivet Discourse? The Jews. The Christians were not affected. Why? Because they remembered what Jesus said in the Olivet Discourse, and when they saw the signs of the abomination that causes desolation, they fled the city just like Jesus told them to. And as a result, the Christians did not die. But between 500,000 and 1.5 million Jews were slaughtered during the 3-day siege of Jerusalem when the Romans came in and destroyed it. It was a terrible, terrible tragedy. Terrible. Okay? Yes?
I was just wondering if the four horsemen could also mean, like, you have your conquering power, and then you have spiritual war, spiritual famine, spiritual death.
I think you can certainly spiritualize it, yes.
Oh.
I think that there is that element to it. It is more understood that these are judgments that fall in a physical way. But they certainly could be applied spiritually. I'm not going to discount that idea. Because when Jesus talks about the white horse being a conqueror, he talks about false prophets that come. And those steal your soul more than they steal your body. So, yes. Yes?
You just mentioned the abomination of desolation in Matthew 4, and
Yep.
the Christians recognized it. So what did they recognize that told them to leave Jerusalem?
I'm glad you asked. This is one of those mysteries that a lot of evangelicals like to talk about, that say it's only about the Antichrist. I think that that's the final understanding of it, but it doesn't reference that in its most immediate context. And I'll make this as brief as I possibly can. I'm going to have Seth keep me to 10 minutes on this. Tiny. Matthew 24, verse 15 says, "So when you see the desolating sacrilege spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go and take what in his house. Let him who is in the field not go back get his coat. And alas for those who are with child and for those who are nursing. Pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath. For then there shall be a great tribulation such as not been from the beginning of the world until now. No, and never will be. And if those days have not been shortened, no human being will be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened." Now, a lot of evangelicals will like to take this and say this is talking about the rapture or the end of the world. The second coming. Well, I've got news for you. If it's the second coming, running away isn't going to stop anything. Fleeing to the mountains is not going to help. If it's the end of the world, it's the end of the world. So trying to run away or praying that your flight may not be on the Sabbath, who cares? It's the end of the world. See, the logic doesn't fit. The logic doesn't fit. What is Jesus talking about then? Now, it's in Matthew's gospel that he referenced that the abomination of desolation was spoken of by Daniel the prophet. This is probably more than any other place in the scriptures where Jesus connects the end time events to an Old Testament prophet, specifically Daniel. And if you remember our study in Daniel, this is a connection to only one place mentions this, and that's Daniel 9, verses 24 through 27. The vision of the 70 weeks. Okay? Now, without going into a lengthy understanding, the question is, what is the abomination of desolations that they should be aware of? Because when they see it, they should run. If it's not the end of the world, if it's not the second coming, then what is it? I'm glad you asked. Because Matthew is writing to a primary Jewish audience, they would have a deeper insight into this reference that Matthew's talking about. What the abomination of desolations is in relationship to the book of Daniel. But for those of us who are not Jewish by nature, we would be left, I don't know what this means. You all know what it means? Have you ever heard of this before? No, most of you haven't. Because you're not Jewish. And you're not living in the first century. You haven't been bred on this. You have no idea. Fortunately, we have another gospel writer, St. Luke, who wrote to Gentile believers. And so he interprets this for us. So if we look at the parallel passage in Luke chapter 21, we will get an idea of what this is. Luke 21 is the parallel passage to Matthew 24.
Chapter 20. Matthew 20.
If you go to verse 10, he talks about nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There'll be earthquakes, various famines, pestilence, terrors from great signs in the heaven. They will bring you before... They will lay their hands on you and persecute you, deliver you to the synagogues. They'll bring you before kings and governors for my name. This will all be a time for you to bear testimony. This is exactly what Jesus said in Matthew 24 in the earlier verse. It says, many, in verse 10 of 24, many will fall away, betray one another, false prophets will lead many astray. Because of the wickedness, men's love will grow cold, but he who endures to the end will be saved.